Hello again, I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. This week's episode features Dr. Meredith Shockley-Smith. She is the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Strategies for an organization called Cradle Cincinnati. They are working to lower infant mortality rates in Cincinnati and to ensure that every child sees their first birthday. Doing that by three strategies. Number one, preventing prematurity by increasing the time between pregnancies. Number two, working to reduce tobacco and substance abuse in pregnant women. And number three, promoting safe sleep habits for babies. If you want to know more, you can find resources, facts, and information at cradlecincinnati.org. We spoke with Meredith at Urbana Cafe. Urbana is a beautiful coffee shop in Cincinnati's Pendleton district, a diverse neighborhood filled with artists and families, and these days, a lot of construction. And between the fire alarms being triggered by the crew working across the street, we talked about Meredith's transition from the academic world as a professor at Miami University of Ohio to the nonprofit professional world. It's a transition that for Meredith was a long time in coming, but it didn't happen that long ago. She's only been in her new role for 7 weeks. So this gave us the perfect opportunity to get a glimpse into one person's transition from frustration to the meaningful work we so often talk about. And Meredith talks about that process. She's very honest about her frustrations in academia, about the paradox of recognizing that unhealthy organizations and institutions are very often populated with great people. And we talked about the pressure of being an example for your kids, the difference between telling someone else they can be whatever they want to be and taking that leap for yourself. For many of us, it's a lot easier said than done. As we started off, as we often do, by building a bit of context, and given that this was a big shift for Meredith, I asked her about how she came to Cradle Cincinnati, given her history as an academic.
It was such an interesting transition. I come from really working hard in academia and not really making a lot of progress, and fascinating juxtaposition on being in the Black World Studies program and also teaching in Women and Genders program. Mm-hmm. And really seeing the struggle of both Black folks and women in that industry was just wild. So I sort of stepped away intentionally so that I could use the theory and put it into practice, which is what we always talk about in both of those subjects.
Have those areas of study been your focus? I mean, obviously they're the focus in your graduate studies. Were those, was that a progressive move in those areas through your academic career, or were those always areas of particular interest for you?
That's interesting. So no, it wasn't. My focus was really in education. Mm-hmm. And I got into education to talk about why we were leaving people behind. Kind of in the face of No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
And I really struggled through college. I struggled in high school. Education was not my thing at all. So I think I got in because I wanted to study those people, and I was those people. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of was like, yeah, great, come in, do this thing. And so it ended up that most of who I studied were the African American community, and that sort of became my focus within the education program.
Okay.
So that worked out well in the transition to Cradle, because it was like I'd spent so much time immersed in the theory and so much time immersed in the community and gathering data and writing, and kind of ended up in a public health conversation. And then boom, I got to do the work, which is exciting.
Do you come from a family of academics?
No, not at all. My mom was in education. She was a principal.
Okay.
My dad was like a blue-collar worker at White Castle Bakery. And most of the people in my family are not, like my aunts and uncles are not college educated.
So when you started,
focus.
When you first went to college, when you were doing your undergraduate work, did you think at that point, I'm going to get a Ph.D.?
Under no circumstances. I was like, what? Why do people do this? It seems so absurd and like masochistic.
So why did you do it?
As I'm a lunatic. No, I'm just kidding. I think it was because when I went to ask, I went to Public Allies, which is an AmeriCorps program, awesome, and the placement that I got was at the University of Cincinnati, and I was doing work with first-generation college kids who were underrepresented or had an economic need, and getting them into master's programs and Ph.D. programs was kind of part of my focus, and because of that, I was networking with lots of different people. And one of the people that I was networking with said, tell me your story. And I was just explaining how it was tragic to go to school and how the education system was like a disaster. And he said, would you like to study that? And I was like, what does that mean? Like, can you go to an institution and study how jacked up it is? Is that like a thing? And he's like, yeah. And so I was like, great, let's do it.
So this was in your undergraduate work, or was this?
That was in my graduate work. So it was after I graduated that I did Public Allies. And during Public Allies, I was working at UC. And then I had that conversation and I applied that same year.
For the master's program?
Right, for the master's program at UC in education. So studying why school is such a challenge for most of the population. If you think about like 20% of people get a college degree, that means 80% of people don't.
Right. And those rates are dropping, not
They've been
increasing.
steady for quite a while, meaning like prior to my going, and last I checked, it was still there.
Okay. And then you end up with a master's in education.
And it's sort of just a shoo-in to get the Ph.D.
How do you mean?
Meaning, like, if you have a committee and you're already doing your research, and if that's going well, it's mostly like, this is my own opinion. I just want to say that. It's mostly...
Not speaking on behalf of any
The University of Cincinnati
institution.
probably doesn't endorse this whole... But anyway, your committee basically helps you get to the next step. Like, let's continue this research.
Right.
So I said yes.
What's the impetus for doing that, though? I mean, and both from their perspective and from yours. Why do they want you to continue to the PhD, and then what was the value for you to continue to the PhD as opposed to stopping with the master's?
I think the true answer for me is why it was good for me was like, what else am I going to do? Like I didn't have a job lined up. Had children, and I was like, it seems like it's going all right. Let's do it. And so I think the benefit of the university is that your research is going well. It's a contribution to the body of knowledge. And it's usually aligned to what your professors are doing on your committee. So it's also like, can you collect some data that can support what I'm doing? Right. It's kind of everybody works together to feed each other.
So you're doing your PhD. You did all of this undergrad, master's, and PhD. You did all at UC.
Right.
So you're in a consistent program that entire time.
I was in communication undergrad. I was in communication undergrad. And then I did Public Allies, and then I did educational studies. Okay. And then I stayed there for my master's and my PhD.
And was the focus of your specific PhD different at all than your master's?
Wholly. So for my PhD, I looked at conversations across lines of difference in education, which super helpful about what does it sound like to share about blackness to white folks, what does it sound like to talk about queerness to straight folks, whatever. But for my master's, I looked at framing violence, structural or otherwise, as a public health issue.
Wow.
So then it was sort of taking that conversation about framing violence as a public health issue, and then talking about like, how do I then make this conversation applicable to other things, to have other folks hear it and want to engage.
Yep.
And then that's sort of where I left it.
So when you finish that PhD, you have, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but what I'm picking up is there's a personal journey of discovery that's going on, which is what education should be, hopefully.
Sure.
Potentially a movement on your part in sort of how you're framing these issues for yourself.
Yes, but I think there was also a part of graduate school that is pushed by your committee and the people who are in your program. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I feel sort of like there was some personal growth, and I think for me the personal growth was mostly that I finished, because I was like, at the end it was very challenging. I'm like, these are not my people, this is not what I really want to do with my life. But then there was this background of don't quit, which is just like, beside being a strong black woman archetype of we don't quit, we can do everything, it was also like, I want to be, proud of my work, and you don't want to be ABD and all of the people in your ear. Mm-hmm. Talking about finishing. So yes, there was growth and development, but I don't think that it was about in the way people understand graduate work. Like, there's this growth and contribution to the body of knowledge and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a little...
I guess, that makes sense. I guess what I mean is more that now the work that you're doing, the work that all of that has informed you to be able to do, and even the work that you were doing at Miami, your publishing and your writing and the advocacy work that you're doing, is all, as it should be, informed by your education. And it kind of makes you,
yes,
it makes
absolutely.
you who you are. It makes you, it helps form
Absolutely.
the person you become.
Yes. That's one of the things that I've said since I got this position at Cradle, was all that I did during my master's and my Ph.D. program set me up to be
right
in this position and in a unique place. And everybody doesn't get to immerse themselves in all of this literature and talk about what's going on in the world theoretically for years and then jump into it. But I think the learning was not just formal. It was also process about like how the institution is isolating and, and both of I think both, the formal and the informal training was great.
So when you finish the PhD, now you have this terminal degree. You've gone through this 12 years?
At least. Probably more like 15.
What did you think you were going to do?
Well, I started teaching early. I was teaching in my master's program.
Right, and most people do through the graduate program. You're required to teach a certain number of hours.
Before I finished, I was co-directing my department at NKU.
Okay.
So I was sure that I would stay in the field.
Okay.
And then but I had been at NKU for all of my graduate work, and I was like, I think I'm ready for a change. And so I decided to go to Miami. And that was quite a change. It was
how so? Do you want to tell us?
I was dealing with at NKU lots of folks who were non-traditional students. They had families. They were commuters. A lot of them had experienced poverty, and so there was an easy entrance into the conversation we could make. And
for people that don't know, NKU, Northern Kentucky University, we've framed this up in past episodes because Michael Wilson went to NKU. NKU is a university that is effectively within the Cincinnati metro area, even though it's a Kentucky university. So we're talking about you're studying at the University of Cincinnati, you're teaching at Northern Kentucky University, and then Miami University of Ohio is up in Oxford, which is 40 minutes away. So all these are just giving people a sense of the geography of sort of where you've been. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries. And then, so that kind of understanding of NKU that I was starting with, in Miami, which is a much wealthier institution.
Right.
It's also kind of isolated, and so it was just quite different, the student population.
It's not a commuter university. It's not an urban university.
Sure. I'm not even. I'm going to leave it there. I'll tell you that
Well, let me say what I think, and that way you don't have to necessarily say it. That the student population at Miami generally, by and large, occupies a much greater position of privilege than the student population at either NKU or UC. And in people that I've spoken to in the past, getting them to engage in issues like these can be more challenging, or getting them to understand, because they don't have those personal experiences of poverty and other societal factors. It can be a more difficult place to teach issues like these. Yes,
and I did not have a community there either, so there was also the connection of living in Cincinnati all of my life and knowing folks, and lots of people went to UC at NKU, and so even the faculty. So there was also just relationships that helped to be supportive in times when it was difficult to teach subject matter or whatever, get folks to engage.
So skipping ahead a little bit, there comes a time, I'm trying to build like a little bit of a timeline here. There comes a time where you decide that whatever you want to do with this education that you have fought for cannot be accomplished at Miami, and then you start looking outside of academia.
Yes, I actually just said it's time for me to put my boots on the ground, and I walked away in December. And I didn't have any prospects. And
talk about what that phrase means for you in that context, boots on the ground.
For me, the tower is not connected to the tower, if in theory, which is kind of the concept of we are not connected to the issues that we're talking about, like hand holding, actually touching, like touch points, and asking direct questions and being able to follow through with that. What does that mean to connect to you and stay connected and support? That's the boots on the ground concept I'm talking about.
All theory and no application.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to, and it was really interesting because theory doesn't always, it doesn't smoothly apply as you want it to.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I read this thing about whatever, and I'm going to do it. And people are like, no, I'm not interested. You're like, wait, but the theory is, this or that.
Yeah.
So I just really wanted to be working with people and to hear them and to help support.
Yeah. The decision for you, because we haven't necessarily said it in this episode, but our podcast is a podcast about work. It's about how people find meaningful work, especially about how people make those decisions and navigate the challenges of work. This is a big transition for you. This is a significant portion of your life. It's basically your entire adult life up to that point has been within academia. And then you say, I've learned all of this, now I'm going to take it out and I'm going to apply it in the real world. I can imagine that you didn't have the network, you didn't have prospects, there's financial insecurity around that. Talk a little bit about what that decision involved for you, both getting to the point where you were ready to step outside of this context that you were in, and then how you did it practically. Like, where did you look? How did you navigate what was going to be next for you in that process?
Big issue was that there's this real divide between academics and everybody else, in particular in the field that I was working in. Because, like I mentioned earlier, theory does not become practice as smoothly as we like to think. And so theorists are like, if you just apply the theory that we've researched and come up with, and practitioners are like, if you were only on the ground to know that doesn't work. So when you go to do a job interview coming from academia, everybody's question was, how are you going to apply this? I mean, like, you're a writer and you sit in your office and you tell people what to say or what to do.
Yep.
It's very different from engaging somebody who's in the struggle and to listen and to then act. And I think for me personally, when I'm happiest, I'm supporting others. And that's what I did in my personal life. So the cell was really who I am and what I do are not aligned. So I want to do that, and that was the way that I sold it. But I also think that the money at the university wasn't really that great, so it wasn't a huge risk. I mean, people are like, you're a professor, you must be so rich.
Right.
That's a fallacy, let's just be real.
Yeah.
And so that risk was kind of, I had a little savings, and I was like, I could literally serve for this content, and I was at the time bartending, which supported my transition. And also, when you are studying about race and about gender and about class, and you are immersed in the oppression of it all of the time, it is hard to keep up the confidence to believe that you're going to go into this workforce and constantly prove yourself. So it was a little scary, and here I go again, having to be enough in this space where that's just all really challenging.
You had to be enough in an academic setting for years and years and years.
Right. And
you figured out how to do that, and now you have to change the entire setting.
Sure. Proving, blackness with a Ph.D. was challenging.
Yeah.
And you would think that having studied that much and getting this degree, people would say, oh, I hear you. They might defer to your answer, like, that makes sense. And instead it was always, no, trust me, I read this, studied this, written about this, I know. And so now I'm back to, explaining myself and trying to be enough.
Well, and in your defense in that process, some of the things that you have been involved in that we haven't talked about, you are involved in the community. You're a member of the Northside Community Council. Northside's a neighborhood here in Cincinnati, arguably the most diverse neighborhood in Cincinnati. You host, I'm actually interested in these, and we can talk more about in your family dinners, that a lot of the things, you're not just operating in a theoretical world, and you haven't done that. You have been working in community, building relationships with people, but
right.
Proving that out in a professional setting, I understand, is still challenging.
Right, what is the value of that? And Thankfully, Cradle was awesome, and they understood the value of that, which was great. And it's literally what I will be doing for a living, which was kind of a miracle. But, so family dinner, I'm not on community council. I was supporting the entertainment and 4th of July parade. I was on that council, which is the best part of community council anyway.
That's the best part of Northside.
And so for 6 years, we did family dinner, which was a potluck at our house on Wednesday nights. And the community there was unbelievable, and the sustainability of it was also fascinating. And that was really what fed my soul and how I could continue to do this other work that wasn't really feeding my soul. And so when people say, like, you should work in your passion area, when I was going to family dinner, or, when I was participating in family dinner, I was like, is this a thing? Like, can you be paid to go to potlucks or to have a potluck? Like, if that's a thing, I'm into it. So it's kind of wild that it's literally kind of come to fruition.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you think about a job outside of the box we've all been told? Like, there are these places you get a job and they have bosses and you fill out an application and you do an interview and boom, versus like jobs you can make opportunity in lots of different ways. That sounds so cliche, but like, do what you love. But I think there's something about that. I don't know how we can make that a little more like tangible, because it sounds sort of esoteric right now. But I believe that is a positive thing for folks.
So it's interesting, because that's actually one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, because academia is such a sheltered world. It's got its own challenges. It's got a lot of things, and not in a particular institution, but everywhere. Academia is undervalued and over-corporatized and all of the problems that are easy to find. But when you move from that kind of a sheltered world into the nonprofit world, but kind of into the boots on the ground world, has that changed for you, and in a general societal sense, how you think about the idea of work, like work with the capital W? And there's a lot of things that go into that. This is a big area, but it's like work means a lot of things to people. It means how they deal with financial insecurity. It means how they deal with questions of value and personal worth in the world and the contribution they're making. And I'm interested to know if this transition for you has changed how you think about those things personally, and then how you, in your work with the people that you work with. Obviously, your Cradle Cincinnati is working with a particular set of issues, but you're also working with people who share a lot of these concerns. Has your conception of what work means and the value of work changed in this process?
100% feeling much more valuable as a person. Like, my contribution is effective, much more like effective and useful. I walk into work every day and I say, I am so grateful to be here. And I think that's like Children's Hospital in general. Great people doing great work all of the time. It's just kind of an honor. But the Cradle team is absolutely amazing. Like, so for me, and this is not to say that the people in the tower, I've kind of like demonized that whole concept in this talk, aren't also doing great work, but it didn't feed my soul. It wasn't the way I wanted to contribute.
Yeah.
It was just outside of my realm of period. So I just feel like it's more of a fit for me.
Yeah.
And meeting new moms and new families, and also getting to meet OBs and doctors, seeing how this all works, and everybody's concern for the high infant mortality rate and the desire to attack that and create some change. It's powerful. It's like getting up in the morning and feeling like whatever I do today, that will actually create some change for Black women as a community, for the infant mortality rate in general. So I'd say it's passion. It's definitely.
Do you feel like, in speaking to those women in the job that you're in now, you have a greater ability to speak directly to their insecurities about work, to maybe advise them from a less theoretical and more, I'm trying to do this myself, sort of a position?
I think that will come, but because I've only been there for a short period of time, it'll take a little bit of time to create relationship and trust.
Yeah.
Before you give advice, because we have an entire team of people, Cradle Connections, who are helping to support needs like that, and what I'm trying to do is create relationship and trust so that we can talk about what does future planning look like, how do we reduce stressors,
right,
how do we speak truth to power, et cetera. So I think that will certainly be, like, my story and their stories will eventually connect. around work, around everything, but I think right now it's mostly just relationship building.
Is the work that you're doing right now making you hopeful about the state of the world?
Yes, both and. I mean, I sort of feel like...
Because you're also closer to the real problems that could have the opposite effect.
There's also a lot of wow, there are a lot of nonprofits, there are a lot of folks who have boots on the ground, and, why aren't these numbers shifting? You can hold that skepticism and fear, and at the same time hold intention that I do believe it's going to change, and that we are gaining more and more people who are working on it. We're gaining more people who believe, who are giving, who are supporting. Eventually, there'll be a critical mass and there'll be a shift, and so it's just a matter of staying the course. I think, holding the passion.
You've talked about this a little bit, but it's a question that I like to ask everybody who's on the show, because you can hear what somebody does and you can hear their title and you can hear their mental process, but it's another to be able to sort of conceptualize what it means in terms of how they spend their days. What are you doing every day? What does your typical day look like? How much time do you spend in the office? How much time do you spend out talking to people? How much time do you spend in meetings?
I mean, I just do podcasts regularly. I'm just kidding. Seriously, I spend very little time in the office, but that's my computer time, a couple days a week. And mostly I work in community. I try to go to places in the community and do my work so that I'm meeting people. And then I kind of partition my day off that I'm meeting with other organizations, other leaders in the community, and then just being in the community the other part of the day.
Right.
And those organizations can be people who are doing work similar to my own, or just who are doing work in communities, period.
Yep.
Usually that's my morning, and then my afternoon is kind of community-driven.
And is that all self-directed? Is it?
Yes, it
You're
is.
coming up with your own list, you're setting your own time in terms of who you're speaking to and making your own priorities and how much time you have to spend with them?
Yes, I have a lot of autonomy at my job, which I really value Cradle for saying, I hear you and I see you as a woman who has done this work and who has put in time and energy. Do what you feel is best, and at the same time, I can go to all of them who have been in the field doing this work for a really long time and ask, who do you think I should be talking to? Who do you think I should connect with? And then those people who they've suggested, and then I go and meet with them and I ask those folks, who do you think that I should connect to? And it's become this really strong, tight web of folks who are doing great work. So I think it's, self-directed in a way, but also thoughtfully.
Yeah.
Just thoughtfully.
What does success in your current role mean to you? How do you know, both in sort of an immediate sense, how do you know you're doing your job well, and how will you know in the long term, more in a personal sense of whatever your definition of success is? How is this pointing you in that direction?
Wow, that is... So for me, this is so general, but for me, success would look like communities of people who are sustainably connected and who are supporting each other in ways that they would like to be supported. And sustainably means long-term for me. So it's easy to do a program here or there. It's different when the people who participated in that program continue to stay in a relationship and support each other. And then whatever goals they set, they meet. And so that's success. Now that I said that out loud and on a podcast, I'm going to be working hard on it.
It's permanent.
Yeah. Yeah.
The internet
Anybody
is
who wants
forever.
to get on board with that, feel free to call me.
Yeah. How has this process, you have 2 daughters? Okay.
Yes.
And how old are they?
16 and 14.
All right.
16
Good
driving.
luck.
Yes. There's a job.
Yeah, that's the real work right there.
Yeah, seriously.
How has this process for you of sort of navigating your way out of academia and into something that is much more direct application affected them, and how does it change how you relate to them
It's
as their mom?
Great. So they're so different. My youngest is very much really rigid in her education, and my oldest is very busy doing all the things, the play, the thing, you're like, Sage, how did school go today? She's like, well, so-and-so said such and such, and blah, 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 had on blah, 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 and, she's like, and by the way, I don't need to be picked up till 7, and I'm sitting in the parking lot picking her up, like that. And then the youngest is like, how was school today? She's like, well, there was a math exam, and there was da-da-da-da-da on it, and tomorrow I need to be prepared for blah, blah, blah. It's very different ways of thinking. And so when I decided that I didn't want to do this job, and they knew I didn't really enjoy my graduate degree, and we did have conversations around the table about it, like, why are you doing it? And part of the answer to that is, do you want to eat? Like legit. And so,
yep.
And so it was really a load off to be able to take the risk when I said, I cannot do this work anymore, because they were also struggling to watch me be unhappy. So I would say, if I were giving them advice, I would say, you need to do what you love, and the money will come.
Did you believe that when you said it back then?
I didn't say it back then. I said it now.
Okay, all right.
And so back then I said, work sucks.
Right, this is what you got to do.
But then you got to eat, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like this, and for me, I always like the doors open and I walk through it. And all, like people who have these 5-year plans, and, whatever, I'm like, what does that even mean, a 5-year plan? Like, I just am like, what? You can go to graduate school. The person who hates undergrad, like literally hated undergrad, is like, okay, doors open, let's go.
Right.
And you get a job, and it's like, do you want to be a professor at NKU? I'm like, no, I don't like school. But then I'm like, but the door's open, so let's go. It's like, what? And then there was a point where I was like, okay, I need to take the reins on my life, because I cannot just walk through every door. So, and I think there was also like a physical response to it. I was physically ill, having to drive. That drive out there was making me physically ill, and we had, the girls were going through it. Mira's transitioned to Walnut Hills, which is, I'm not going to talk about education. So anyway.
All we're talking about is education.
That in that sense, like I'm not going to talk smack about CPS, but
I know.
I think there's also a reality of like, how much can you really do if you really don't like it? Yeah.
That point, you said there was a point that you came to. Was that a progressive realization where you just sort of said, I can't take it anymore? Or was there a moment where you realized something's got to change?
It was progressive on like, I can't take it. It was progressive, like, I really am not enjoying this. I'm really not enjoying this. But it had been going on for so long, and I kept telling myself, again, I can do anything. Mm-hmm. You can, you're strong, powerful, and da-da-da, And my mother was saying the same thing. And, there's also like this way of supporting somebody in misery. Mm-hmm. And I felt supported in that. But there was like a point where I was like, why would you want to do something you are miserable about?
Yeah.
Miserable in. That was a really hard, it was hard to kind of flush that out. Like, is it because work is hard and it sucks? And like, I'm sure there'll be days, even in my job at Cradle, even though I haven't had one, where I'm like, I'm tired or I'm overwhelmed or it's not going well or whatever. And so it's like, is it that this isn't what I should be doing? Is it that this isn't what I should be doing anymore? Or is it that it's just tough?
Yeah.
So I think that if one was dealing with that, the way that I wrote it out was, what else could I be doing? What else would I want to do? I kind of like dreamed up ideas and thoughts, and I was like, let me just work on it.
So I'm really interested in that, because I would imagine that there are many people listening to this who, hopefully people listening to this who are in their dream job and are doing stuff that is very fulfilling to them. But law of averages would suggest that there are probably just as many people listening to this who are miserable in what they're doing, and maybe are listening to a podcast about work because they're trying to either figure out what's next or drum up the courage to take the steps. Are there any specific behaviors, actions, lists, questions, conversations that you had that gave you the courage to, first of all, believe that you could do something that you didn't hate as much, and then actually take action to go out and seek it?
I think one of the things that I did was journal about it. I started to journal. My journaling originally about work was trying to get rid of the negative thoughts and let it go. So it was just basically just writing the misery. And then I started to shift to like, what would it look like if I enjoyed work? And so it was like, okay, I didn't enjoy X or Y. And so what if I went to work and I could do this or that? Like, what if I could do the practice of it? What if I could like not drive 45 minutes to work? Whatever. Started to like try and manifest positive concepts about it. I also will say that my partner was like, just walk away, and that's also a really big gift because financially, I mean, I'm talking smack about how much I made. I was, contributing significantly to the household. So it's like, if you were a single parent or you didn't have that financial reality, I am not suggesting you quit your job, is what I'm saying. Unless you thought of that out a little more than like, well, she did it, I'm gonna do it. I'm like, not the best plan. And then I got a secret agent, which I could tell you about, who seriously was like, we got this. And I was like, we do? Okay. And then we did. Am I allowed to talk about my secret agent?
I don't even know what that means.
Are you serious?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Terry Heist is a secret agent.
Terry Heist, co-producer of this very podcast.
Indeed.
Okay.
Has some secrets that apparently she's not sharing.
Oh.
And they are to do, I don't know how secret they are, so I'm only going to share a little about it, but like networked me into places I didn't even know existed. And like has a social life that's also like exciting and, I don't know, powerful women doing powerful things. And then there was also this, like, can you edit this? It was like, it doesn't even matter what you need. She's like, gotcha. And then it's like this turnaround in like 2 hours. And I don't know. So I would say, get yourself a secret agent if you're going to take that step and say, I'm quitting my job.
But in all reality, like, first of all, Terry is magical. She's sitting right here.
Literally magical.
And she is wonderful, and the podcast would not exist without her. But if you can't have Terry, what you're describing is you had an advocate.
Yes.
You weren't carrying the weight of that alone. You had somebody who, whether they could edit your stuff and whether they had that network or not, you weren't bearing the weight of that just alone, or even necessarily alone within your family, but you were sort of, it sounds to me like getting counsel, getting input, getting encouragement, getting practical help that was greater than the resources that you had to bring to bear in the process.
Yes, I agree with that. And also, just like my friendships were also big in that, because they were sounding boards of like, am I reasonable right now or am I unreasonable? That was also really great. And if you have people who are, the naysayers are also good, because they kind of check you when you're like, I'm out, I'm leaving. They're like, oh, wait, whoa, what about like this or what about that? And you're like, okay, that is a reasonable thought. And then you can handle it. You can think about, making a well-rounded decision at the right time. I'm still going to say that if there's somebody who is literally focused on that option, like a secret agent, I don't know if there are more realities there of like businesses or whatever, but there was something really truly important about somebody who I could easily just drop in and say, hey, I haven't written a resume like at all ever, because like Vita is like, here's all the things I wrote, here's all the things I taught, and the resume is like, I don't care about any of that.
Tell me what you can actually do.
Tell me what you can do for us. So that was interesting.
So do you tell your daughters, has the conversation, and I don't know if you're having these conversations with them, they're 16 and 14, I don't know if they're thinking about what they're gonna do, but when you apply this experience to them, do you use the words, do what you love and the money will follow, or is it more complex than that as you're trying to shape what they think they're capable of? It's
really interesting. So I was mentioning both of them on different spectrums of like ways of engaging education. So the oldest, who is Sage and is 16, can sing like a songbird. And people have told her, and this sounds like I'm being the mom, like stage mom or whatever, but people are like, she has perfect pitch, she should sing. And she's like, singing is not a thing I want to do. Like, even though I love singing and I'm passionate about it, she's like, that isn't what people do. Like, people are engineers, people are like, doctors and whatever. So she's like,
it's not a job.
I need to do this thing. And I'm like, you cannot, why would you want to be a doctor? You pass out literally at the sight of blood. Or like, an engineer would be on a computer sitting down all day and you want to be outside or whatever. So it's just like, these are the kinds of conversations that I think should be also happening in education, where it's like, what are you good at? What do you love? Instead of like, here are the respectable jobs you can and should do. And then you try to fit yourself into that. And I find that that's how you get to a place of misery, where you're like, I'm doing what I should be doing. And should be is never really, I mean, let me not say never. It's rarely, I would imagine.
Right.
Also haven't researched that, but
Yeah.
it's just like these boxes cannot possibly contain all of us. So I think we are having these kinds of conversations. Like, how do you think about passion differently? How do you think about work differently than what we're usually pushed into thinking?
Yeah.
Which I'm working on in myself. I probably wouldn't finish my Ph.D. if I followed my heart. I would have walked away. I probably wouldn't have, stayed in the university if I had followed my heart. But I also didn't know how to think about it differently at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, this is the door, we're walking through it. So I would say take a pause and think about that.
Yeah. My son and I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before or not, but my son and I talk about these kind of things. And he said to me a couple of years ago, in a moment of childhood brilliance, everybody always says you can do whatever you want to do, but nobody's doing it. And
that is brilliant.
And that ability to, I feel like for everybody at any age, there is a need to be able to visualize something actually taking place before you can.
Absolutely.
There's a woo-woo sense to that in terms of like bringing things to you, but there's also just the physical, you can't do what you can't imagine. And
so big.
Somebody has to help you imagine something. Somebody has to help, if she were ever to do it, somebody has to help your daughter imagine that an income can be made and a life can be supported by singing.
So reasonable. And then, I mean, somebody said to her, like, there's only one Beyonce. And I'm like, yeah, we're not trying to be Beyonce here. I mean, there are millions of jobs, millions probably a stretch, but lots of jobs around music. It doesn't have to be that you are a traveling star.
Right.
It's also new to think about what does it look like to do your passion. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Does everybody have that choice? Do you think that's like...
So back to my job at Cradle, that is one of the things that when we talk, so we have a weekly dinner. I'm really into weekly dinners with some moms.
Now I understand how all your work gets done.
Yeah, just come over to my house. We'll figure it out. It's not going to be a problem. Bring a dish. So at these weekly dinners, we were talking about, like, what do you want and what do you need and where do you see yourself going? And a lot of that is, I am not really sure because I'm currently thinking about whatever situation I'm in.
Yeah.
And so one of the separations that is happening for me in my role is that Connections, Cradle Connections, 211 if you need some support as a mom or as a pregnant woman, they are doing that work, handling situations of need and supporting moms. I am supporting moms in a different way, which is about imagining what future looks like. It's about imagining what community looks like and that support. So when we talked about, like, who did I go to and who was valuable in my transition, that's what I'm talking about, that kind of community. Where people are listening to you, who are giving you positive and negative feedback, who are also concerned about your needs. So what does it look like if I don't? Can we make dinner every other week? Can you make dinner on Thursdays and I make dinner on Wednesdays and they make dinner on Tuesdays? Kind of lighten my load, whatever that is. So
sometimes it's really practical.
Sometimes it's really practical. And sometimes it's dreaming together, storyboarding, whatever. So I think that's a good distinction to make between, like, what we're saying about need or want or dreaming.
Yep. I was just listening to another podcast, lest I indicate that there are other podcasts than this one. I was listening to an NPR podcast, and I'll figure out which one it was, and I'll put something on the website about it because it was great, but it was talking about how the science behind how scarcity changes behavior. And the actual mental processes that when you are afraid of something, it changes your behavior and it limits your options. And everybody, I think, is generally sort of like aware of the idea of the hierarchy of needs. And
sure,
that if
absolutely.
your basic needs are not met, then you can't consider higher needs. But I don't know that we societally are aware of that it actually changes our decision-making processes. It changes the chemistry of the brain. And getting into those discussions with people. So, number one, recognizing the value of the work that you're doing, but also speaking to somebody who might be listening to this and saying, well, that's great for you to talk about being able to do meaningful work, but I'm trying to put food on the table. That it's unrealistic for that person to expect to make the leap until they have taken care of those needs and have created a safety net, and that is an acceptable and okay and necessary place to be.
Absolutely. I wouldn't trade the work that I put in that I would say I wasn't happy probably during any of that work during graduate school. I did enjoy students. I loved teaching, and so I'm a relational, community-oriented person, and I started to do that in my classroom, which is what ended up in my Ph.D. dissertation. But the struggle was real, but it was necessary.
Yeah.
It was necessary to eat and ultimately to get me where I am at Cradle, because I'm sure that my PhD helped get me in the door, and the work that I was doing with Black women and the Black community there helped get me in the door. So I would definitely say there's no judgment on not doing what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
It's just a gift if you can. So there's like a process of during the struggle or during the hard work of thinking about what does it look like to do something else. So it's like holding an intention or working on those things at the same time, which again helps to be in community, because you're working and then you come and you can kind of lean into that space and think about life differently.
Is there anything that when you were in that place, kind of in whatever was sort of the hardest phase of it, that you wish somebody had said to you, or that you wish you had heard?
I think when I was there, most people who knew that I wasn't really happy said to me things like, "You'll be fine," instead of things like, "What do you need to be happy?" I wish I had started the conversation earlier about the fact that I don't have to be miserable and that I don't have to complete something because society expects it, or you have this like unreasonable belief that you need to do this or that. So I think you are okay, and you can do this thing, but that you don't have to. Like, I don't know. I wish somebody would help to facilitate a don't continue to be miserable conversation a little earlier.
Yeah.
Before my wife was like, "I think you should quit." I'm like, that is the best idea you've ever had.
Before it's all or nothing. So looking forward, and like we talked about, you've been in this position a fairly short period of time. But as you look at what this is pointing you toward, are you hoping? And I'm not talking about like after this position. Hopefully this position lasts forever and is fulfilling to you forever. But like, what does this make you think about your future, and what does this make you capable of hoping into for the future that you were not capable of before you were where you are now?
It's so interesting. So part of what what I hope for the future out of this role is also that we can support people who were where I was, which is like, this isn't the life I'm trying to live, but that I can make it what I want it to be. So I'm hoping that we can empower women, and in particular Black women, to facilitate the life they want, and sustainably without it being, my job, but that it's like a changing of the narrative.
A cultural change instead of just you needing to have this position in order to be able to do it.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's what I see as what I hope for the future.
Right on.
Sounds kind of woo-woo, but...
No, it's the stuff.
Okay.
It is.
It's
the real thing.
It is.
Yeah, and it may be woo-woo, but it's not going to happen unless somebody says it and starts acting toward it and believing in it.
I do truly believe in that, in the work that Cradle's doing.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for talking about your process with us, because I think that very often, like we talked about with teenagers, very often the difference between being able to imagine yourself doing something and not even conceiving it of is just seeing somebody do it and having somebody tell you that it's a thing and that it's okay. And I think as adults, we often get trapped in this cycle of scarcity around our work opportunities and professional opportunities simply because we can't imagine doing anything except turning the hamster wheel that we're already on. So you being open about all of your process I think helps all of us imagine what could be different about ours.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate you taking the time and hanging out with us for a bit.
Anytime.
This episode of the Distiller Podcast was recorded live at Urbana Cafe, 1206 Broadway in Cincinnati's Pendleton District. Thanks so much to Dr. Meredith Shockley-Smith for joining us on the show. You can learn more about her work with Cradle Cincinnati by visiting cradlecincinnati.org or by checking out this episode at thedistillerpodcast.com. You can also learn more about Urbana Cafe. Thanks to Daniel and to all the staff of Urbana for hosting us, for the always amazing coffee, and for the constant stream of dogs and their owners that wandered in while we spoke. You gotta love a pet-friendly business, and having a smiling pooch looking up at you while you're recording definitely sets the right mood. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production, booking, and photography from Terry Heist. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Productions. You can find The Distiller on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Please subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. And if you like what you hear on The Distiller, that helps us in numerous ways to get the word out. You can also download episodes, find links, and get more information, including photos of the guests and the locations. You can get in touch with us at thedistillerpodcast.com or by email mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. Whether it's to suggest people you think should be on the show to talk about their search for meaningful work, somewhere interesting we should record the show, or maybe even something interesting we should drink while doing it, whether by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, we would love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.